So I want to look at one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. You know, some of the prophets wrote, and we have their names written, ascribed to the books that they wrote, and others we find them in the midst of those like the kings. And this one particular prophet that we want to focus on this morning is Elijah. Elijah holds a place in the hearts of many of the Israelites, as well as the people even in Jesus' day. And we see that when God had the appearance of Moses representing the law and Elijah representing the prophets, that Elijah was given a position like that. And you'll see other times that even when they said, who do they say, remember when Jesus asked Peter, who do men say that the Son of Man is? And he said, some say Elijah or one of the prophets. And then he says, who do you say that I am? And he says, I am the Christ. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But Elijah was held in great esteem. And maybe one of the reasons why is something that I think is a great lesson regarding Elijah, and that is that he wasn't one that was surrounded by a lot of supporters. He was one that stood out and did what he needed to do, even though it had some pretty dire consequences for himself and even for the nation and the things that were done. I want to pick up with the story of Elijah, or the description of what Elijah did in a couple of particular events that are covered in a couple of chapters of the book of 1 Kings. We're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 17. 1 Kings 17. And we're going to begin with the description of the one who was king when Elijah is introduced, and that, of course, is wicked Ahab. And Ahab is probably one of the better known of the bad kings, but he's not the only one. He's one of many kings that were certainly not good kings. And you'll notice there's kind of a single sentence description, as there is in most of the references to the kings, as to what kind of king he was. This is in verse 30 of 1 Kings 17, when he says, Now Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. That's not a good resume. He did worse than all that were before him. And so he indeed was a wicked king. And of course, if you back up a little bit and read some of the others, and you have his father mentioned in verse 25. Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did worse than all who were before him. So it's getting worse and worse with them. Now these are the kings of the northern kingdom, and Ahab, of course, is one that married this Queen Jezebel. Well, in fact, it's mentioned in the next verse. It came to pass, in verse 31, it came to pass as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. I'll talk about that in a moment. That he took as wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and he went and served Baal and worshipped them. Now, just a little quick reminder of the sins of Jeroboam that are ascribed to the reason why the northern 10 tribes are carried away. And they were the changes that Jeroboam, there were two Jeroboams, but the first Jeroboam made these changes to what God had set in place. And remember, he's the one that was given the northern 10 tribes, and then he was afraid that the people would keep going back to Jerusalem and their heart would turn back to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, and then they'd kill him and go back to him. So he devised this plan that he would set up, instead of having a temple in Jerusalem to go to, he set up a place in Bethel in the southern part of his kingdom and Dan in the northern part of his kingdom. And he said, it's just too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here's the places you can go to worship. And he set up these high places, and he set up another priesthood, not from the tribe of Levi, not according to the instructions of the law of Moses. He set up a change in the day of worship. So he's making these changes, and he also gave them a golden calf to worship. Now, as best I can determine, The worship of the golden calf among the Israelites was not attributed to another god. They wanted to worship God through the golden calf. And I'll tell you the reason I believe that. One is because there's always a huge difference made between what was going on there and when they instituted Baal worship. But also because when Jehu, the one that comes later, the king that is next appointed, that comes in and wipes out Baal worship and was intent on only serving Jehovah God, he still had worshiped the golden calf. I don't know, we're not really given an explanation of why they did that. It's almost like they thought, oh, this is part of our heritage. Remember the golden calf? Did they get the rest of the story? What did they do? Just get that part of the story and didn't get the rest of it? Did they miss out on the second commandment? You shall not make unto me any graven image. And why make a calf? But whatever it was, those things were going on, and then he takes them a step further. And that is something further away from God, where now not only are they not following God the way he told them to, which was sin, and it was wrong, and it became the reason why they were carried away. And that's the sins of Jeroboam. Just notice it as you're reading through many of these Old Testament scriptures. But then he instituted Baal worship, this god Baal that you hear about all through the Old Testament as they keep falling back into these gods that the people of the land had been worshiping. And another one is Asherah, the tree goddess, that they would worship as well. And they brought in these false gods, and in this case, it came through the influence of his wife. And that doesn't excuse him, but it does show, if we wanted to say lesson number one, be careful who you marry. Because she took him further away from God and the nation as well. It says in verse 32, he set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And he had made a wooden image, I believe that's the Asherah. And he said, some of them may have that translation there as well. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And then it mentions, which may just be a relatively coincidental thing, but it mentions about this one named Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation with Abiram, his firstborn, and his youngest son Segub. He set up its gates according to the word of the Lord, which had been spoken through Joshua the son of Nun. And that is that they would lose their firstborn. But as it goes on now, here comes Elijah, entering in chapter 1 of 1 Kings 17. Elijah, the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years except at my word." Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Get away from here and turn eastward and hide by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan, and it will be you shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and stayed by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So just a couple of observations that we want to notice here. That God is stopping the rain as Elijah is telling Ahab it's not going to rain anymore. Now the motive of this is, and we see this in a little bit later in chapter 18, he's wanting to get people to take seriously their abandonment of worshiping God and him only. And that they had taken lightly. They had just let themselves fall into this idolatry, this absolutely pure idolatry. There was the image worship that is a form of idolatry and in the wrong direction. But now they're accepting the idea of there being these other gods that don't even exist. So he's saying it's not going to rain. Now you know already that it's in the third year. And in fact, when we're told, made reference to this in the book of Luke and in the book of James, it actually ends up being 3.5 years with no rain. Can you imagine Can you imagine here, 3.5 years with no rain? I mean, we're not the wettest part of the country, right? But we get some rain. And in fact, if we don't get rain for a while, we start getting worried. But can you imagine literally going 3.5 years with no rain and what it would do? I don't think our pine trees could survive. I wonder what it did to the land in that day. That land that at one time, as they entered it, was a land flowing with milk and honey, was lush. Maybe it wasn't quite so good after these kinds of things that came upon them as a result of their abandonment of God. But certainly, he says, he tells him to get out of here because he knows that his life is in danger. But while he flees, God is providing him. Can you imagine this? What he says happened? That the ravens are bringing him food? I mean, we might have to swallow our pride a little bit to take food out of the mouth of a raven and eat it. But realizing this is what God is bringing you. He's providing your sustenance. And the brook is there, and he's drinking the water, and he has what he needs. He is, from Ahab's perspective, he's a fugitive. From God's perspective, he's his prophet who is providing this to him. But now it says that it happened after a while. The brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. See, I've commanded a widow there to provide for you." So here comes another interesting thing that happens that also has to do not only with providing for him, but for the widow as well. Isn't that interesting that when you typically think of widows, especially in the Bible, they're the ones that need taken care of, and instead it's the widow that's providing for him. But of course there's more to that. You know what it is already. But let's read it anyway. He said, then the word of the Lord came, verse 10. So he rose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, indeed a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her, "Please bring me a little water in a cup that I may drink." And as she was going to get it, he called her and said, "Please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." So she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Last meal. This is all they have. There's nothing left. Elijah said to her, "Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but make a small cake from it first. Bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son." Sounds like a selfish prophet, huh? Hey, make it for me first, then you can have some. "For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and her household ate for many days, and the bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke by Elijah. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned this house became sick, and his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, "What have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" Apparently she's realizing her own faults. And she thinks now this has been, the prophet coming and bringing everything to light. And now there's going to be the consequence, and it's taking away her son is what she thinks is happening here. And he said to her, "Give me your son." So she took him out of her arms, carried him to the upper room we was staying, and laid him on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son?" He stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, I pray let this child's soul come back to him." Then the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, And the soul of the child came back to him, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber and upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And then the woman said to Elijah, "Now by this I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is the truth." So now, I don't think it means she didn't believe it before, because she saw her oil's not ending and her flour's not ending. But it's just more confirmation to her. This is real. This really is a man of God, and these things will happen. And remember, part of the word of this prophet was, if you go back to chapter 17 and verse 1, where it says, "There's not going to be any rain except at my word." What kind of, authority that God had given to Elijah as it relates to that? We might say a curse that was on the land until it was time. So then it says, and this, you never know if it says many days or few days what it is, but in this case he defines it, and he says, "It came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the earth." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab, and there was a severe famine in Samaria. And Ahab had called Obadiah, who was in charge of his house. Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for so it was while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them 50 to a cave and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go into the land to all the springs of water and to all the brooks. Perhaps we may find grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so that we will not have to kill any livestock." So they divided the land between them to explore. Ahab went one way by himself, Obadiah went another. Now, as Obadiah was on his way, suddenly Elijah met him, and he recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is that you, my lord Elijah?" And he answered him and said, "It is I. Go tell your master Elijah is here." Interesting response now. He said, "How have I sinned that you are delivering your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me?" You want me to go tell Ahab that I saw you? What do you got against me? Why are you having me do this? Not only that, he was concerned about what he mentions next. He says, "As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to hunt for you." And when they said, "He is not here," he took an oath from the kingdom or nation they could not find you. Now you say, "Go tell your master Elijah is here, and it shall come to pass, as soon as I'm gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you to a place I do not know. So when I go and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. But I your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth." So he's worried about Elijah disappearing again. He says, "Was it not reported to my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, 'Go tell your master Elijah is here, and he will kill me.' Elijah said, 'As the Lord of hosts lives before whom I stand, I will surely present myself to him today.' So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him," and this is a key verse, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" We might use a different word. Are you the one? Are you the troublemaker? You're the troublemaker. Look what you've done to our land. And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed the Baals." The consequence of what Ahab was doing, and really the thing that was being done to try to bring him back to God, is what Ahab saw as trouble. But Elijah is identifying that the real trouble is taking people away from God. That's where the real trouble is. He says, now then he makes the challenge. He says, "Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent for all the children of Israel, gathered the prophets together on Mount Carmel. Elijah came to all the people. There's just some great quotes in here. I just want to point out how many times in this story there's phrases that are so significant. Verse 21, Elijah came to all the people and said, "How long will you falter between two opinions?" There's one commentator that made the point, and some of your versions might say limp between the two sides. Does some of your versions say that? Well, maybe more it's the older versions. And some have said that maybe that was a kind of a reference to, it has to do with like stepping over his threshold and back like that. And that it may have even been a reference to like what happened, remember with Dagon, the god of the Philistines, when they put the Ark of the Covenant in there and it fell over and it broke the hands and head off of that idol, And then the Philistines wouldn't step, they had a thing about, because it had happened on that threshold, they wouldn't step on a threshold anytime they went into a house or anything else. I don't know if that has anything to do with this or not, but the commentator thought it might have to do with like idolatry and not idolatry. But the fact is, it is talking about whether they're going to, what they need to make up their mind. Are you going to serve God or are you going to serve Baal? Why? You're claiming to be the people of God, still got there are things you do that are relating to following what they had learned from God, and then they're following Baal. So he says, if the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now, we know that Obadiah had hidden 100 prophets, but apparently they weren't ready to come out of hiding yet. So he's describing himself as he's by himself here, and Baal has these hundreds. Baal has 450, and then the Asherah another 400, actually 850. You put them all together. So he gives them a challenge. He said, let them give us 2 bulls. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. I want to note something about the word Lord. You should have it in all caps. If you're using an old American Standard, that's not what it's called. It's just called American Standard, but it'll say Jehovah there. And it is the 4-character letter known as the Tetragrammaton, that is the 4 Hebrew characters that represent the name of God. Remember, there were no vowels in Hebrew, and they're not really certain how it was to be pronounced. Today, some versions use the word Yahweh. It could be Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah. We're not certain how it's exactly to be pronounced. And many of the ancient Jews believed that God's name was too holy to say. I don't think they got that from God, but they believed it was too holy to say. Unless they say it wrong or without enough reverence, they would actually stop and pause for a moment of silence and skip over every time they got to that word, and then they'd keep reading if they're reading out loud. But it is the name of God. It is identifying the one true God. When God was speaking to Moses, and Moses said, who shall the people say sent me? And he said, you tell them that the I am has sent you. And it is a form, the word Yahweh or Jehovah is a form of the word I am, the ever-existing one. So when he says the name of the Lord, he's not just saying Lord like the way they would refer to other people or refer to a master, but rather of the Lord, of the one with this one identity that is identified. Then we find this from all throughout the Bible. But he's saying, I'm going to answer the Lord, the one who, and the God who answers by fire. He is, and he says, you call on them, I'll call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. Here's the contest. Whoever makes the fire come down and burn up the offering, that's who's God. That's who needs to be worshipped. So the people said, it's well spoken. They're agreeing to it. So they did. Verse 26, they took the bull which was given to them, they prepared it, called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Oh, Baal, hear us. There was no voice, no one answered. They leaped about the altar which they made. So it was at noon that Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is meditating, or he's busy, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep, and we must be awakened. You need to be a little louder. Maybe he can't hear you. So they cried aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances, until the blood gushed out on them. Midday was past. They prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. Not meaning that the people weren't seeing what was going on, not paying attention. There's no response. Because there is no Baal. Baal doesn't exist, except in their minds. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all the people came near to him. He repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. They had the altar to Baal. Now there's the altar of the Lord that had been broken down. So he repairs it. Notice he takes 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. Verse 31. Then it says, then with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed, and he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid on the wood, and said, fill 4 water pots with water, and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. He said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar. And he also filled the trench with water. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said. Now I want to just notice the contrast between all the hooping and hollering and shouting and cutting and whipping and dancing and all this other that's going on. He just says the simple prayer. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. Then the fire of the Lord, that was the end of the prayer. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones. How hot does it have to be to consume the stones? And the dust. And it licked up the water that was in the trench. And then all the people saw it, and when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Jehovah, he is God. Jehovah, he is God. Yahweh, he is God. Yahweh, he is God. However that is to be pronounced. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and executed them. And Elijah said to Ahab, go up and eat and drink, for there is the sound of the abundance of rain. So at least in this acknowledgement that the people made of saying the Lord, he is God, and them turning on the prophets of Baal, and this eliminating of these, now he said, there's the sound of the abundance of rain. It's about to really rain. And Elijah said to Ahab, so Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. He bowed his knees to the ground, put his face between his knees, and said to his servant, go up now and look toward the sea. So he went up and looked and said, there's nothing. And 7 times he said, go again. It came to pass the 7th time he said, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand rising up out of the sea. So he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. And it happened in the meantime, the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was heavy rain. So Ahab rode away and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. I think that was a miraculous run. If I'm reading that right, it wasn't just Elijah was a pretty fast guy and he outran Ahab and his chariots. No, I think when he says that the Lord came upon him, he was able to make some tracks pretty quick to get there. Now, I'm going to mention, just kind of summarize a few things that happened after this. So Ahab goes back and tells him what happened. And of course, Jezebel is furious and wants to destroy Elijah. And he runs away, and he makes the prophet that at the end of verse 14 in chapter 19, he says, I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And then, of course, God tells him in verse 18, I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. I want to just mention that, and then one other thing before we close the lesson. So Elijah is willing to stand up when he knows his life's in danger, and even though there's hundreds of these other priests and the people are following Baal, to stand up for God. And I think that's something we need to learn from, is we need to be willing to stand up even if we do feel like he did, that he was the only one. And even at this point at the end when he's saying, I'm the only one left. You're not. You may not know where they are. You may feel like you're the only one, but there are others. And God is aware of those that are his, no matter how distant they may be from each other, no matter how disconnected they may be in that regard. And so Elijah, of course, is encouraged to remain faithful. In fact, he's also told that he's going to do 3 things. He's going to anoint a new king, Jehu, who's going to destroy Baal. Remember what Jehu did? And he said, I'm going to have a big sacrifice to Baal. All you people come in here, we're going to have a big sacrifice to Baal. Now, I don't want any followers of Jehovah God in here, just Baal worshipers, because we're going to have this great sacrifice. They didn't know they were this sacrifice. He sends the people in, they kill them all, and it said that he eradicated Baal from Israel at that time. He also was going to appoint a king in Syria, who was going to actually be one that would come and punish the northern kingdom. And the third thing he was going to do was to appoint his successor, which is Elisha. And sometimes it's easy to get those two mixed up because their names are so close and some of the things that one and the other did. And then, of course, just to finish it, is that Elisha ends up being the one who sees Elijah carried up into the sky in a chariot of fire. Can you imagine what that was like for Elisha to see that? And the final thing is the verse in James chapter 5 that makes reference to the things that we just read about. And it makes an application to us when he talks about the value and the importance of prayer. He says in verse 17, Elijah was a man of nature like ours, and he prayed. This is James 5. I don't think I said the chapter. James 5:17. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. And he says that right after he says this in verse 16. Confess your trespasses to one another. Pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And then he gives this remarkable example of Elijah's prayer for the rain to stop and prayer for the rain to come. So we think about the power of prayer, the significance of prayer, and especially when we think about the motive that is behind it. I have no doubt that his motive was entirely to try to bring the people back to God. And the effect of that, we're not ones that know entirely what it was, but it certainly had a radical effect on overthrowing much of the influence that the Baal worshipers had. So I want to just keep that in our minds as we think about one of the great prophets and where he was and some of the things that were done through him. But I also want to take an opportunity to offer the invitation, if you find yourself away from God, those people were given a wonderful opportunity to see who God really is and know that they needed to trust in him. And we've been given a whole Bible full of things to help us to understand the God that we follow. And when we see that we are alienated from him, we shouldn't hesitate to do whatever we need to do to be back right with him. And that may be initially in making the decision to become a Christian, that we repent of things that are against his will, that we confess our faith in him, and that we are baptized for the remission of sins and raised to walk in newness of life. And if that's something you need to do, or if we can help you in any way, we invite you to come forward as we stand and as we sing.